Hey guys, so we're on to the next part of our test review, and we're going to be looking at determining the impact of multiplying by a fraction. So I want to show you some examples that are different than what we have here, but basically what we have going on is, for those of you that were in class, we talked about it on the patterns notes that we had in our notebook. If you're at home, you just kind of had to notice it throughout the process of multiplying and dividing. So we're going to go over it now, though, so everyone's prepared for the test. So multiplying by a fraction. In elementary school, we're taught that it doesn't matter what we have. If I have 5 and I multiply by 1, I'm going to get 1, right? And then we're also taught, let me make this a little bigger. We're also taught that if we multiply by something like this, then it gets larger. So one of the misconceptions is that when we multiply, it always gets larger, which is, or maybe when we multiply by something other than 0 or 1, it always gets larger. But that's not really true. That was true for intermediate, but that's not true for middle school. See, 5 times 0 is not 5, it's 0. That's what I get for trying to think about one thing and write another. So what I want us to look at is what happens when we multiply by different types of fractions. If I take 5 and I multiply it by 1/2, or if I take 5, so these are the ones I'm going to do. 5 times 3/4, 5 times 4/4, 5 times 2/2. And then I'm going to have a couple other examples that I'll go into after that. So to start with, I'm going to look at what happens when I multiply by a proper fraction. I know that I have to change that to 5/1, and then I multiply straight across. I call that parallel parking because I'm just going straight across. It gives me 5/2, and my final answer is 2.5 because I say 2 goes into 5 2 times. 2 times 2 is 4, so 5 minus 4 gives me my 1. On the next one, I have to put my whole number over 1, and I multiply straight across and get 15/4. If I'm not sure how to convert it, this is the best way. 4 goes into 15 three times. I also have a remainder of 3, so my answer is 3 3/4 for my product to those two numbers. Okay? So notice how when I multiply by a fraction that is less than 1, that my product is less than my original number that I start with. Doesn't matter what it is, whether it's 1/2, 3/4, if I did it times 1/10, or if I did it times 8/9. It's always, your product will always be less when you multiply by a number less than 1. Well, what I'm doing here is actually multiplying by 1 because 4/4 is 1, 2/2 is 1. But let's test it out and make sure what I'm saying applies still. So when I go straight across, I get 20/4, which divides out to be 5. 5/1 times 2/2. 5 times 2 is 10. 1 times 2 is 2. 10 divided by 2 is 5. So anytime I multiply a number, or divide for that matter, but a number by the same number, this is the same as multiplying by 1, right? When you multiply by 1, it stays the same, right? You already knew that from way back when you started learning how to multiply. Now the last one I'm going to look at is the improper fractions, or anything more than 1. So these are proper fractions because it's less on the top, greater on the bottom. So I'm going to look at if I multiply by 4/2, or maybe if I take it and multiply by 20/3. So if I have one that's less on the top and my answer is less at the end, the same on the top and bottom, my answer is same on the end, I want you to think about what that's going to mean for these, because these numbers are greater than 1. So now, again, I have to take my 5, put it over 1 because I have to convert the whole number into a fraction. And when I'm multiplying, I just multiply straight across. 5 times 4 is 20. 1 times 2 is 2. And then when I'm simplifying, I ask myself, just to kind of remind y'all, especially because you weren't in class, I want to remind you the numbers I look at when I'm simplifying. I ask myself, can I divide by one of these? So I say 20 and 2. I always start with 2, 3, 5, then 7. Can I divide them both by 2? Yes. So when I divide both of these by 2, I get 10 over 1, which is 10. And that makes sense because 4 halves we know is 2. 5 times 2 is 10. We're good. Now we're going to look at something that would actually be a mixed number, right? Because that 3 doesn't go in equally. And we're going to do the same thing. 5 over 1 times 20 over 3 gives us 100 over 3. Well, for this one, there's nothing I can simplify and by, but I do need to find out my answer. So to change this fraction into a decimal, just like in our last unit, we put top out, bottom, top in, bottom out. We put the dividend inside, divisor outside. 3 does not go into 1, so I put a small x. I don't like leading 0, so I put a little x. 3 goes into 10. 3 times, that gives me 9. Because the steps are to divide, multiply, then subtract. Bring it on down, and then bring it back. 3 goes into 10. 3 times. And then, because we're doing fractions, we're going to keep it as a fraction. This becomes my numerator, and this stays my denominator. So now, when I multiply by a number greater than 1, my answer, my product is greater. When I multiply by that 5, by greater than a number greater than 1, my answer is greater. So if you multiply by a number greater than 1, your product is going to increase. It's going to be bigger than that original number. Okay? So that's just kind of something to kind of say before I have you guys solve these on your own.